G'day there. When I started doing landscape photography, I thought that composition was just about how the elements and objects in a scene was arranged in the image. Something that I just had to deal with when I was out in the field taking the shot. But over time I realised that composition is much more than that, and it can be improved with different editing techniques. This week we're going to look at how to make improvements to your composition just by using the crop tool. And I'll be talking about the sorts of things I consider when I'm trying to work out the best crop for my images. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. So if you need a website, a domain or an online store, make your next move with Squarespace and use the discount code Marr. There's a number of aspects to consider when you're composing your shot, which I've covered in another video that I'll link up here. If the parts of the landscape you include in your photo is the story, you can think of composition as how you tell that story. An effective composition comes down to how well you present the landscape to the viewer, how well you lay out the scene in the photo, and how well you take the viewer through the scene. So with these things in mind, let's look at ways in which just cropping your photo can improve your composition and improve your image. A good composition not only guides the viewer through the scene, but also minimises distractions that might catch the viewer's eye. There are distractions we can correct by cropping, like centering an object that's meant to be in the middle of the frame or straightening the horizon. These are the sorts of things you might have thought you got right in camera, but now you have the opportunity to view the image on a bigger screen with a bit more time. They don't look quite right, so we can tweak them with the crop tool. If the image is unbalanced, it can feel a little awkward and can divert the attention of the viewer. Again, by cropping out a portion of the photo, the overall balance of the image can improve. Other distractions in the photo can be elements that have been cut off by the edge of the frame that don't really play a part in the story or the scene that's been captured. It could be an odd branch from a nearby tree, a rock that looks out of place, or some clouds that don't quite fit with the rest of the sky. These can be potentially removed or at least reduced by adjusting the crop. If not corrected, these seemingly small things that don't feel quite right can be distracting or even confusing to the viewer and end up weakening the image. So that's distractions dealt with. Now let's have a look at how cropping can improve the story in an image. One way to look at how to improve your image is to work out how much of the photo is about the interesting part of the scene or story. You can crop into a scene removing parts of the image that are not adding interest or context and filling more of the frame with the interesting elements in the scene. Cropping out parts of the photo that aren't necessarily distracting but just don't add to the story is a great way of simplifying an image. It's also worth identifying any negative space you have in the photo. If you feel it adds to the story or mood of the image, consider retaining it or even exaggerating the negative space within the crop you use. Alternatively, adjust the crop to reduce it if it's unwanted dead space that's just taking attention away from the main subject. A great image has a flow to it, as your composition helps guide the viewer through the scene. When you're cropping an image, keep in mind where the leading lines are in the photo. Aligning the guiding lines with corners or positioning elements with the intersections of the 1/3 line will help support the flow of the image and is pleasing to the eye. Having said that, don't worry about getting guiding lines or leading lines coming exactly from the corners or the elements being precisely on the 1/3 line. Using these points as a rough guide is more than enough. Trying to get them any more accurate than that won't make your image any better. Next is framing and aspect ratios, but before we cover that, I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. When I redid my website last month, I wanted a new look plus extend the site to incorporate an online print store, and thankfully I found the process quite easy. I have a new landing page with this awesome parallax scrolling effect, which I'll use to feature one of my latest images that I've taken. I've also brought through onto the page content from both my print store and my gear store that I've set up on the site. If I want to change the order of the elements on the page, I just click and drag the content and the page automatically updates. My blog transferred over without me having to do anything. In fact, while building the entire site, I didn't have to deal with any code, which makes it easier to set up and quicker to maintain. Plus, the online store integrates with payment gateways, which makes the whole process hassle-free. So head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. That'll give you heaps of time to get a website set up. And when you're ready to launch, make sure you go to squarespace.com/Andrew Marr to get 10% off your first purchase. Selecting the final aspect ratio of your photo can be important. It's pretty much the window or frame through which people will view your image. A wide pano can give the feeling of an epic or expansive view as the frame extends to the left and to the right. A crop with a portrait orientation can be used to draw the viewer into the scene with a dominant foreground. Other aspect ratios can provide a nice balance between these two extremes, like 3:2, 4:3, 4:5, or even a 1:1 square crop. Which one works best depends on other factors mentioned in this video: reducing distraction, enhancing the story, and providing a frame that supports the subject and the composition. Here are a couple of quick tips when it comes to selecting crop aspect ratios. The first one is, we all have our favourite aspect ratios that we prefer and like to use. But the photographers whose work I really enjoy are the ones that are prepared to break away from the aspect ratios they usually use and decide to use an aspect that best suits the subject and the story they're capturing. So don't be scared to try crops that are different to your normal go-to ratios. The second tip is, while the best aspect ratio for some subjects and images are quite obvious, other images can be suited to a few different aspect ratios. When this happens, create a couple of different versions using different crops. Come back to them a day or two later and see which one you prefer. Also, try and get feedback from family and friends. You might be surprised. The one you think might be the best aspect ratio might not be what others prefer. A few years ago, I captured this image from Scotland and I shared 3 different crops of the same image in the video, and I asked you for your preference. When the results came in, there was no clear winner. Each image got around about a third of the votes. I also want to quickly mention that I never crop in camera. I always crop in post-processing as part of my editing workflow. There's a few reasons for this. There's a lot happening when I'm out there on location. Besides all the filming that I do, there's gear that I'm dealing with, there's the other settings that I'm tweaking. I'm keeping an eye on the changing conditions and the changing light, and I'm looking out for whether I need to shift the position of the camera to improve the composition. The last thing I want to do is make a final decision on the aspect ratio that I can't change. So I always take my shots with the full aspect ratio of the camera. For the Nikon full frame, that's 3:2. For the Fuji GFX 100S, that's 4:3. That way, I'm using all the pixels on the sensor, giving me the most amount of flexibility and options when I decide to crop in post-processing. When I'm editing back on my laptop, I'm more relaxed, I can take my time, and as I mentioned previously, I'll often play with a few different cropping options for some images. There are some cameras out there that have a crop preview setting that you can use to see in camera what the image with a particular aspect ratio crop will look like before you take the photo. But when you do hit the shutter button, it takes the shot using the full sensor. I think it's just as important to think about composition when you are editing your image as it is when you're capturing your image. Hopefully this has highlighted how your composition can be improved in post-processing just using the crop tool. Other editing tools can also be used to enhance the composition, but I'll share that in another video, so subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss out on that. Hopefully this video has been helpful. If it has, please give it a like down below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.